The title of this book is Get the Scoop, Plans and Poems for Making Compost. Do any of you know what compost is? Have you ever heard that word before? Who can tell me what they think compost is?
Organic material.
Wow, okay, organic material. Does anyone else have any other thoughts about what compost is? You can use picture clues on the front cover to help you think about what that might be.
It helps food grow or gives worms food.
Okay, it helps food grow or gives worms food. Those are both really good answers. We're going to continue on and learn more about what compost is and how it helps these little earthworms. Do you like to recycle? If so, give composting a try. So that gives us a hint. Recycling and compost, those go together. Composting, so that word compost is in here. Composting recycles waste from your kitchen and yard into fertilizer for your garden. This book gives you the scoop on composting from start to finish. Okay, let's go to pages 4 and 5. There's my title page. And I see that the way that the illustrator did this book, you can see it has real images of the different dirt and the mulch and the compost, but then they also give us some illustrations. That's pretty creative. The author is Jennifer Boudar and illustrations by Dave Smith. Okay. If we look at these two pages, what are we noticing about compost? What might be a clue? What do you notice? Let's look specifically at this photograph. What do you see in there? Yes, so this is called a composter, and it's like a giant trash can, good connection. And it breaks up all of the foods and all of the leftover materials. Do you remember what we said those leftover materials are good for? It told us on the back cover. Let's go back and reference it. It said it's from your kitchen, so things that you don't eat, leftovers, and yard, like leaves and mulch and dirt, and those help your garden to grow. They're fertilizer. Okay, let's move forward to the next page. And we're going to read this page. I'm going to read this page to you, and then we'll come back and read it together. Greens and browns abound. Does anyone know what the word abound means? A lot is a good guess. Anyone else think they know what abound means? Let's read to find out. Scraps of raw fruits and veggies, eggshells and old coffee grounds, tea leaves and clippings from houseplants. The greens in your kitchen abound. From that sentence, do we have another idea of what abound might mean? Together, okay. From your kitchen abound. A whole lot of things come out of your kitchen. Any other thoughts? Okay, let's keep reading. Bark chips, small twigs, and corn stalks, dry leaves raked up from the ground, clumps of dry grass, straw, or hay, the browns in your yard abound. So as I'm reading that, I'm thinking about all of these things that are coming together, and they're creating this compost. So they're forming anew. They come together and they form anew. Non-glossy paper and cardboard, these items are also a go. Pests are attracted to meat, bones, and dairy, so these are a definite no. The inside scoop. What gets collected? 2 kinds of organic material are collected for composting. They're nicknamed greens and browns. Everything's biodegradable. Whew, that's a big word. which means it can rot and break down. How many of you have ever seen coffee grounds or tea leaves or leftover pieces of leaves out in your yard, things that can be broken down? Or maybe you have an apple that you've eaten and you left it on the table and it started to turn brown. It's starting to rot and decompose. All of those things can break down, which means they're biodegradable. It means they can be broken down. That's a big word. All right, so I want you to come back with me and we're going to read about this again, and we're going to try to come up with another understanding of the word abound, and then I want you to use it in your own sentence, okay? Greens and browns abound. Go ahead and read with me. Scraps of raw fruits and veggies, eggshells and old coffee grounds, tea leaves and clippings from houseplants, the greens in your kitchen abound. Bark chips, small twigs, and corn stalks, dry leaves raked up from the ground. Clumps of dry grass, straw or hay, the browns in your yard abound. Now I'd like you to turn and talk to those at your table and come up with your own sentence using the word abound as you think about what that means from what we read in our book. Take a minute to turn and talk to your peer. Some people are being resourceful and they were checking their dictionaries to come up with what the word abound means. Can you share that with us, what you found in your dictionary? Because using resources is important.
It said a large existence of something, so then we said, so it's like taking away from the word abundance.
Okay, so we're looking at how words are connected. Who can give me an example of how they used the word abound in their own way? Okay.
We said like a library has an abound of books.
Okay, a library has an abound of books. I can see where you said that too, like it connects with an abundance. Maybe you could say the books in the library are abound. They create this whole display, this whole collection, okay? I might use an example of the school supplies at the beginning of the year abound in the classroom, okay? They come together and there's just a whole bunch of them. Okay, now let's go back to the front cover because this was plans and poems. Did you hear when I was reading how the words were rhyming and how there was rhyme and repetition and a rhythm to how I was reading? I'm going to share with you one more poem from this book today, and I want you to be thinking about that too, because that helps me as a reader as I'm going through, and I am using expression and even things about composting we can read through and make poems about. Mighty microbes, tiny, invisible, yet mighty in nature. Decomposers, recyclers, breaking down organic matter. Hey! Our friend said organic material. That was really good. You must have read the book ahead of time, didn't you? Releasing nutrients. Living things need to grow. Tiny, invisible, yet mighty in nature. What is it that you heard in this poem that is something that helps you read it better? Did you notice how these parts repeat? Tiny, invisible, yet mighty in nature. And then it repeats again down at the bottom. So sometimes when you're in your writing and you're creating poems, when you repeat certain phrases, those important parts you can repeat again to add emphasis to the reader. Why do you think that I emphasized this word mighty when I read it?
Because it's in all capital letters and it's bold.
It's in all capital letters and it's in bold. Why would the author do that? What would be the author's purpose for putting it in all capital letters and bold? Why do they want the word mighty to stand out? It shows the importance. And even though something is tiny, sometimes we say small but mighty. These are tiny but mighty. So it means that they want us to understand that even though these little things that break down are tiny, they have a big job to do. They are mighty. Okay, so this book will be in our classroom library that you can come back to and read with a partner, or you can read by yourself. And then tomorrow we'll come back and we'll do another reading of it, and we'll look at some more of the poems, and we will talk a little bit more about composting. Your challenge for today is to find a way to use the word abound in your conversation with friends as well as in your writing this afternoon. Any questions? Okay, so again, I wanted to share with you, this is the book that I will be referencing today. You have access to the link that has the introduction, which is where a lot of the meat is, but I do recommend down the line, if you have any extra funds, that you might purchase it because it's got a lot of really great lessons in it. So today we're talking about shared reading, and as we've discussed, this is different than an interactive read aloud. We talked about the fact that shared reading spans across multiple days with the same book so that students have exposure and repetition and they can familiarize themselves. Who remembers the blank plus blank equals blank that I talked about at the very beginning of the semester? Do you remember what those 3 words were? You can go back and look at your notes. That's okay. There are 3 words. Blank plus blank equals blank. Confidence plus something equals success. What's the other word? Competence. Write it down if you don't have it, because I promise you I will ask you that question again. Shared reading builds confidence and competence because they get to have a teacher support them in the process. They feel like they can do it on their own. I bet you could easily explain to someone what abound means after our brief exposure to it this morning. Okay? So it begins to build that confidence and competence, which then helps them to be successful readers and writers. Okay. So, scholars to know, you know I'm always going to do this so that you're successful in knowing who different people are and how they've contributed to the field of literacy. There are 3 scholars that are referenced in this text that I want you to know. Richard Allington is a literacy researcher, and his focus is on oral language and how that furthers the development of fluent readers. Shared reading emphasizes oral language, and as the teacher modeling it for the students, it models fluency and expression, which is a component of fluency, accuracy, pacing, all of those key components to being a successful reader. Reggie Routman looks at this from a lens of equity. When you are supporting students who are English language learners or who may not have had access to someone reading with them, we know that lap reading as children is really important, to be able to snuggle up with a caregiver and read a book and have those shared experiences. For those who haven't had those shared experiences before with shared reading, now they get them with you. And all students get them. And you're helping expose them to vocabulary, you're exposing them to new content, composting, all different kinds of ideas and language that can support all learners. And Don Holdaway, this is the guru of shared reading. He emphasized that the shared reading experience fosters security, trust, and an expectance of what would occur within the lesson. This goes back to what we've talked about all semester. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Those basic needs are being met in this experience that fosters that confidence and competence for success. You guys are going to rock the praxis. I just know it because you're going to know all these scholars Amazing. Okay, so what are the benefits of shared reading? Well, there are so many to name. I just pulled 6 that we're focused on in this book, but there are so many to talk about. So shared reading responds to students' curiosities about things around them in real life, authentic connections that they can make, things that they're actually going to see and experience. It allows them to wonder about why things grow. What do we need to help things grow? They are able to make those connections between that rotten apple core that's sitting on their kitchen table. So all of those different pieces that they can think about and wonder about, and then maybe even experiment with. So you can see how there's a cross connection too here between literacy and science. It nudges students to dig deeper. So as the adult, we're scaffolding them. Remember I said that's like that support. We're helping carry them through that gradual release of responsibility to the point where after several reads of the shared reading text, they're then able to do it on their own because we've given them multiple exposures and we've coached them throughout the process. It moves learners from understanding to application, so they begin to apply, just like you did when I said, now turn and talk with a partner and use the word abound in a sentence. They then go from an understanding to an application, which is that Bloom's taxonomy, okay, higher levels of thinking. It bridges whole group and small group instruction. So as I shared with our big books, that happens in our whole group, and then we have opportunities to bring those smaller books into a small group where you can meet with them again, or they can do it with peers. There's a lot of opportunities for them to apply, or it could be a partner reading. However you want to structure that to give them repeated exposures to the text. And then it focuses on a wide range of literacy strategies, which we know are so important. Vocabulary, comprehension, the foundations of literacy, concepts about print. All of the things that we've been talking about all semester are embedded within there. One thing that this text really talks about that I want to ensure that you pay attention to is on page 5. It talks about the different SEL competencies, social emotional learning. We know that our students need that social and that emotional confidence and competence. That's part of that. So it talks about the fact that self-awareness, social awareness, decision-making, self-management, and relationship skills are all embedded in the philosophy of shared reading. It accommodates all of those different pieces because we're engaging together as a group. There's not a lot of cognitive demand, meaning my brain doesn't have to focus on decoding words. My teacher's doing it for me. They're front-loading all of the vocabulary. They're modeling think-alouds to help me with my comprehension. You're doing all of the labor of the reading. They're enjoying and they're listening and they're absorbing that. So that when they go back to that text a second time, I bet you they're going to remember the word composting. I bet you they're going to be able to find the word abound and use it in a sentence. So it's those repeated exposures where we go back and talk about that again. So be sure you check page 5. Okay. So when we think about, that was our social emotional. When we think about shared reading lessons, I pulled this quote because I think it's really critical for us to consider. Shared reading lessons by nature are designed to bring learners together around a shared purpose and piece of text. So be thinking about how you can set a purpose, okay? How can you ensure that there is a common theme tying this together for students? That is in the lesson cards, but if you're coming up with one, they are also, if you're using one that's in this book, so if you want to peruse this as before you leave today, you're welcome to do that. Make sure that there's a clear purpose for what you're teaching that day. That can tie back to your standards, but remember I always say the purpose should be tied to what students need from your assessment data. The standards support that need depending upon what it is and how you can address that. So the reading process in a shared read. This is still similar to an interactive read aloud in that you still have your before reading, your during reading, and your after reading. So your before reading is where you set the stage. It's where you introduce the book. It's where you kind of go through the concepts about print with the front cover, the back cover. The back cover gave me a purpose. It told me what the book was about and what we were going to learn. The during reading is where we're eliciting a comprehension conversation. I'm not just asking questions, we're actually having a conversation about what we're reading. And then after is where we apply those things. Okay? where we talk about the vocabulary, where they create, maybe they create an advertisement to encourage others to recycle and compost. Okay? So all of those different pieces are ways that they can apply in authentic and meaningful ways. It's not a worksheet where I'm asking them to define words. It's not a worksheet where I'm asking them to make the definition match the word or identify what composting is. It's something authentic that they could post around the building where they're still applying the concepts, but it's allowing them to create and think at different higher levels. Okay? So, why shared read? We know that time is of the essence. Some teachers say, I'm doing an interactive read aloud, I'm doing mini lessons, I have to fit in math, I have all of these different things. I need to do guided reading, I need to do my foundation skills groups with the U-Fly that we learned about earlier in the semester. But why should we prioritize shared reading? Because it is engaging. It invites active participation. When we read together, the first day I read it to you, I'm modeling, I'm setting the stage, but then I invite you across the consecutive readings to read with me. We even experienced a little bit of that today in that first reading where we did it together. So there's active participation from students. It builds upon oral language. This is huge because this is a science of reading foundation. The research behind the science of reading is what we're reading currently, but this has been true for a long time. Richard Allington is from the 1990s. So the emphasis on oral language development as a predictor for later reading success has been there forever. Okay? We just are focused on it again now with the science of reading. Story sense. Even in informational texts, we're getting a sense of how those text features. We saw a bunch of them in this one. All of those basic elements of a story or of how informational text is structured. Fluency. This is key because they're seeing you model it. The word mighty, my expression, my intonation, the way that I emphasize that for you is modeling fluency in that way. And talking about why the author chose that is an author's purpose, which is a comprehension focus. So all of these things are interwoven into this one shared reading that we did today and across several days. Think about the impact that that would have. And it supports all learners. So for our English language learners, students who need that extra vocabulary, they need to be able to see the vocabulary with the real photographs. Most of them have probably never seen a composter before. The trash can was an excellent connection because they're similar and they can kind of make that connection as to what it would look like. Aside from these, as we just talked about with SEL and building that classroom community, as we've established all throughout the semester, I would venture to say that across all the shared readings that you would do in your classroom, you're going to see significant growth as a result. And even our 4th and 5th graders can engage with that type of text, or there's other ones that are in a reader's theater narrative where they can all have parts and practice those parts and present it to the class. What an authentic way to get them engaged with reading and practicing over multiple exposures than just reading something and answering comprehension questions on a worksheet. And that's your charge. Your charge is to come up with ways to make learning fun, engaging, authentic, and meaningful for these students. Okay? So, when you're thinking about it, focusing on the beginning, the middle, and the end. You may not get through the whole book with a shared read. For example, with that one being broken down into poems, I chose a couple pages to illustrate for that day. That condenses my time if that's an issue for me, but still, there was a lot of teaching that occurred in just that small amount of time. Okay? But focusing on those structures. That's more for story structure, so informational text pulling out key information. Okay, so I had given us time to practice today, but you're going to be pushing into your classrooms to do your interactive read-alouds, so I want to give you time to do that. But there is a Reader's Theater script here that I linked. You can look at it as an example. As you prepare for next week in your shared reading, all the classroom teachers have the big books for K3 with the small copies. If they don't want you taking the big book like I shared earlier, you can maybe take a small copy to use for planning. You don't have to use those. If you want to look at my book and find one here and take a screenshot with your phone of 2 pages to have the lesson, you can do that. If you want to create your own entirely as a reader's theater and having them do a performance play or any kind of script, you can do that too. It would be really fun if you had enough time that they could write the script with you and then they could perform it. But I don't know that you'll have that kind of time. But that would be really fun. So be creative. Choose what you want to do. And then you'll submit it again next week like you have been before that. If you want the 4th, 5th grade materials, you can use these new ones from Fontes and Pinnell that we're piloting and just find the lesson card that goes with it. Those are suitable for 4th or 5th.